Today we dive into a case that's incredibly disturbing, the story of 8-year-old Cherish Perrywinkle. It forces us to think about the evil that exists in the world, but also the ways our systems fail and can lead to such horrible tragedies. We're going to try and understand how this happened, the events that led to Cherish's death,
Yeah.
and look at the complexities of it all. The role of mental illness and the difficult balance between individual rights and the protection of the vulnerable.
Yeah. This case, it's one of those that really sticks with you. And as we kind of unpack it all, you'll start to see why. It's a really unsettling look at some of the vulnerabilities that we have as a society.
Right. So Cherish was living in Jacksonville, Florida,
Okay.
with her mother, Rain, and 2 sisters. Her parents' relationship was difficult, and Rain had primary custody. This background of instability, it's important to understand that because it kind of feeds into the events that happened later.
Yeah, for sure. The family dynamic is definitely part of the context here. It speaks to a certain level of vulnerability, which becomes a crucial factor,
Yeah.
very crucial factor as the story unfolds.
Now, on June 21st, 2013, a trip to a Dollar General store. Seemed ordinary, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it turned into a total nightmare. This is where Donald Smith comes in. He was 56 years old and had a long criminal history. I mean, really disturbing criminal history. And he had just been released from prison 3 weeks prior.
3 weeks. Yeah, it's a fact that really raises a lot of questions, right? Was everything done to keep people safe? And as we get deeper into Smith's past, you'll see this wasn't just someone making a few bad decisions. I mean, this was a pattern, predatory behavior of decades.
At the Dollar General, Smith saw Rain. She was struggling to buy clothes for her daughters.
Yeah.
And he approached her and he offered what seemed like a pretty generous solution, right? A Walmart gift card.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he and his wife never used. And he said, hey, why don't we all go over to Walmart and my wife can meet us there. Now, the detail about the wife, that's important.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a total lie, fabricated, calculated to build trust, to make it seem like everything was normal. Smith was preying on Rain's vulnerability as a single mother and using this made-up wife to come across as less threatening.
It's just terrifying how easily he was able to manipulate the whole thing. And Rain agreed to go with him. They all got into his van and drove to the Walmart.
Yeah, and at this point, you can really see how the trap was being set, how Smith was using deception just to get close to Rain and her children.
Right inside the store, the charade just continued.
Oh.
They shopped around. Smith kept up this act, right, like he was a helpful family man. But then around 10:30 p.m., he made an offer that would change everything. He said, hey, I'll buy cheeseburgers for everyone, from the McDonald's that was inside the Walmart.
Right, and this was like the culmination of all this grooming. This was the point where he could separate Cherish from the rest of her family. He said he would take her to get the food while Rain and her other daughters were in the fitting room.
And Rain, she believed him, thought he was a trustworthy guy, and she agreed.
Yeah, and that decision, I mean, you can imagine, it would haunt her for the rest of her life. It's easy for us to judge, right? We know what happened. But in that moment, Rain was acting with the information she had, information that was very carefully crafted by Smith.
Of course, Smith didn't take Cherish to McDonald's. There's security footage. She shows them leaving the Walmart together, and there's no sign of distress, no struggle, nothing to suggest that Cherish was alarmed. That's always struck me as particularly disturbing.
It really shows you how much control Smith had and how good he was at manipulation. He might have promised her a treat or who knows what, but the lack of any visible distress, it just highlights how insidious his actions were.
Back in the fitting room, Rain started to get worried. I mean, she went to the checkout, right? Expecting to find Cherish and Smith. But they were gone. The panic she must have felt, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, that's got to be every parent's worst nightmare. And the fact that she waited 48 minutes to call 911, I mean, that's been a big point of discussion, right?
Yeah. Why do you think she waited so long?
Well, some people think that Rain, she was dealing with her own mental health issues, and maybe she was hoping that there was a simple explanation, just clinging to that hope. Others say that when she did finally call, the police didn't really believe her at first, maybe because of her background or her mental health history.
Man, if that's true, that's a really scary example of how biases, even if we don't realize we have them, can have just awful consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, those minutes that were lost, they could have been so important.
Yeah. So they finally issued an Amber Alert early the next morning, And thankfully, someone saw Smith's van at a church.
Right, that tip was huge. It led the police on a chase. And they arrested Smith, but Cherish wasn't in the van.
And then they found her body in a creek near that church. Sexual assault and strangulation.
And the DNA evidence, there was no question it was Smith.
Now, the trial was pretty quick. And the defense, they did something really strange. They didn't try to question any witnesses. They didn't bring any of their own witnesses. They didn't even give a closing argument.
Yeah, that's a weird strategy, right? Some legal experts, they think maybe they were just trying to hurry things along, maybe hoping for a lighter sentence, you know?
But the jury, they weren't convinced. They only talked for 14 minutes. 14 minutes for such a serious case. And they came back with a guilty verdict.
14 minutes, that tells you something, right? The evidence against Smith, it must have been overwhelming. And those jurors, they all agreed he was guilty.
And Smith got the death penalty. He tried to appeal. But the Florida Supreme Court, they upheld the sentence. To really understand how huge this tragedy was, we need to look at Smith's past. It's full of red flags, missed opportunities. I mean, it seems like the system just didn't protect innocent people.
Yeah, his history is, it's disturbing. The criminal behavior started early, and it just kept getting worse. And it was always violence, especially toward women and children. He had a traumatic brain injury when he was 9. And by the time he was 10, he was already showing sexually deviant behaviors.
Okay, let's go through this timeline. Because to understand how this could have happened, we got to understand his past. This is a man who people said was dangerous again and again. But the system didn't do enough. Why?
That's the question, right? It's the question that haunts this whole case. 1974, he's arrested for auto theft, larceny, arson. I mean, that's already a bad sign, right? The next year, it's burglary and drugs.
And then in 1977, a really important moment, he commits a sexual assault.
And what's even more disturbing is that he didn't show any remorse. He refused counseling. This wasn't just a mistake, you know. This was his deliberate act. And there were warning signs, clear warning signs.
But it didn't stop. In 1981, he's impersonating a police officer. Theft, burglary. It just keeps escalating. And then, in 1992, he's arrested for attempted kidnapping.
And get this, in 1999, mental health professionals, they actually recommended that he be committed permanently. They said he was dangerous to the public.
And nothing happened.
Nothing. They didn't do anything. It's the same story over and over again, right? They see the warning signs, but they don't act. And it continues in 2003. He promises he won't get arrested again. But guess what? He's back in jail for burglary, among other things.
It's like he was a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And they just kept letting him back out.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way to put it. And then, just 4 days before Cherish was murdered, Smith went to a hospital. He said he had been on a 4-day crack cocaine binge, and he wanted to be committed because he was having thoughts about killing his drug dealer. He was asking for help. He knew he was dangerous.
And they turned him away.
They did. The system failed him. And most importantly, it failed Cherish.
In Smith's trial, his mental health was a big issue. They diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, major depressive disorder, severe cocaine use disorder. And there was also some evidence of CTE and epilepsy.
Maybe from that brain injury when he was a kid. I mean, it's complicated. But does any of that mean he wasn't responsible for his actions?
That's the tough question, right? It's at the heart of this whole thing. Mental illness, it can affect your judgment, your impulse control. But it doesn't mean you're not responsible. And with Smith, there's a lot of evidence that suggests he knew what he was doing, even if his mental state played a role in his choices.
What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Look at how he acted right after the murder. When the police stopped him, he lied about where he had been. He said he was with sex workers. He knew he was in trouble. He was trying to cover his tracks. And then there are the recordings of his conversations with his mother from jail.
Those must have been hard to listen to. What did they say? They were really unsettling. In those recordings, Smith talks about how much trouble he's in. He blames Cherish. He says she got into his van. He even says he wants the death penalty because he's afraid other inmates will kill him. He's trying to control the story.
So he's trying to use mental illness as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility.
It's possible. In those conversations, he also talks about using mental illness as a legal strategy. He asks his mom to get him a copy of the DSM-IV. That's the book they use to diagnose mental disorders. He says, mental illness is my whole defense, basically. He even talks about going to a hospital as civilized treatment. I mean, it makes you think about the connection between mental illness and the justice system.
It's a scary thought. And we can't forget about his crack cocaine use.
Right. People who testified at the trial, they said that crack cocaine made him more impulsive and aggressive, and he even used crack in the Walmart bathroom right before he murdered Cherish.
This case is just a horrible example of how individual problems, problems with our system, and the effects of addiction can all come together
Yeah.
with just terrible consequences.
We can't forget about Rain in all of this, can we? I mean, her role in all of this and how much blame she got. It's a complicated thing, right? She made some bad choices, that's for sure. Trusting a stranger with her daughter and then waiting so long to call 911.
Right, and it's something she's going to have to live with for the rest of her life. But we have to think about it from her point of view. I mean, she was struggling financially. She wanted to provide for her kids. And Smith, he seemed like someone who could help. And we know Rain had her own mental health issues, and that probably affected the decisions she made.
Yeah, it just shows how even people with good intentions can make terrible mistakes. And for Rain, the consequences were really serious.
She lost custody of her other two daughters. They ended up being adopted by an aunt who lived in Australia. And she had to deal with all this public judgment, all this blame, on top of the grief of losing a child and the guilt. This case is just tragic on so many levels. So many questions about responsibility, about how society fails people, about how complicated mental illness is. What can we learn from this? How can we stop something like this from happening again?
Man, those are the questions, right? The questions that keep me up at night. This case, it's a terrible example of how individual problems, societal problems, missed opportunities, they can all come together and lead to something awful. It forces us to think about some really uncomfortable truths, about our systems, about how we fail to see the warning signs.
If there's one thing we should take away from all of this, it's that we have to listen to mental health professionals. I mean, so many times their expertise is ignored. People don't take their warnings seriously. We need a system where those warnings mean something, where people who are dangerous to themselves or others get the help they need.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we need to address the bigger issues too, the things that contribute to these tragedies. Poverty, the lack of access to mental health care, addiction, these are big problems, and we need to do something about them.
This case, it's a wake-up call. We can't just sit back and do nothing. This should make us want to change things. It should remind us that we need to protect the people who are most vulnerable.
Cherish's story, it shows us that we need to make our systems stronger, fight for mental health resources, build a society where these kinds of tragedies, they don't just happen and we feel bad about them, we prevent them.
Well, thank you for joining us for this. It was tough, but it was important. This story reminds us that we all have a responsibility to create a safer and more just world for all kids.